one of the things that I'm really passionate about is creating generational wealth and particularly Gen 1 wealth, meaning that, you know, I think a lot of us, we grow up with legacies that we're not necessarily proud of. And a lot of us, are really, we're at a pivot in this point in history of where we have to choose where we're going to go with our lives. Are we going to continue the same legacy that we've been given, or are we going to create a new torch that we're going to pass on to our children? And the whole purpose is really to, share those stories with others that may not have come to that point yet, because reality is that next generation is, you guys have an opportunity to go farther than we've ever gone. But by telling you our stories, you don't have to learn the things that we had to learn.
Welcome to Reward, the podcast of The Trust. We are the show specifically for women entrepreneurs who want to build businesses into the multi-million-dollar revenues and beyond, but especially because we know the reward is much greater than that. I'm Allie Brown, and I'm excited to introduce you to these diverse female leaders from a variety of industries, women making huge impact and who are unwilling to settle for the status quo. On the web, visit jointhetrust.org to learn more about our modern community for forward-thinking 7- and 8-figure women entrepreneurs. That's jointhetrust.org. See you there. Now, get ready to enjoy this episode's powerful conversation. Hi, Susanne.
Hi, Allie.
How are you today?
I'm doing really good. Glad to be here with you.
I'm glad for us to finally be doing this. I thought we had. It's one of those things that, do you know when you think you've done something and then I'm like, we haven't had you on the show? I'm like, well, we got to get you on the show like right now. So thanks for making time. Especially, how was your Thanksgiving?
Oh, it was wonderful. It's nothing like just taking that week off just to spend time with your kids and your family and do nothing but create a turkey.
I had a great week with the kids. It was amazing. And like Monday was kind of a gift, right? I want to get back into routine and send them to school. So it was awesome. I am so happy to talk with you because, in the trust, we've had such great conversations that you've brought to us around everything you do and your expert advice on everything from CFO strategies to high net worth tax strategies. And we'll get juicy in a little bit, but I really think it's important for people to know a bit about your background and how you came into your career and how this all started. So can you take some time and kind of go back to the beginning?
Yeah, definitely. So, I have been a CPA for, oh my goodness, over 20 years. Today is definitely a Miss Clairol day, but over 20 years. I think I stopped counting once we hit 20. And it was interesting because, when I actually started working for my dad when I was 14 years old. He had an accounting firm in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he hired me to be his bookkeeper. So I kind of started off on that route very early on. I tell people, from being a tax accountant in past life, that one of the best things that you can do to create generational wealth is, that gift of apprenticeship, giving your kids that gift of being able to learn what you do. Because imagine being 14, learning bookkeeping, learning how to fill out simple taxes. I remember I got to college, and by the time I graduated, my fellow classmates were learning how to read financials in realistic perspective. And I felt like my major was, it was, the best way to put it was, I studied less, partied more, and still got straight A's. And was really, set off to go for a really great career. Got to go to Arthur Andersen, which was the number one firm in the country at the time. Then later on went to KPMG. And when I had my daughter about 16 years ago, started out my own firm. I was I was on an airplane heading to Toronto. I was in charge of the Toronto operations at the time for the company I was with. And I remember being in my third trimester of pregnancy, a little bit over 6 months, and the airplane stewardess had walked by my seat, and she was like, can you put down your chair bar? And I remember trying to push the chair bar down and my stomach being in the way. And it hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, my life is about to change. Here I am flying to Toronto every single week. And about to be a new mom, and my life is going to change completely with that. And so it was important at that point that I really figure out what I was going to do with my career. And I ended up starting my own firm. I ended up leaving my company, never coming back from maternity leave, and starting my own practice, and immediately it was a success. We ended up getting some of the largest contracts in the country with Chicago Public Schools, Houston Independent School District, City of Houston. We were ended up being Goldman Sachs 10,000. We grew this huge small business practice where we helped small businesses with their accounting and their tax needs. And recently, we divested our traditional accounting and tax practice, and now I get to focus on doing what I love, and that's the fractional CFO world.
I also want to mention Susanne is author of Profit First for Minority Business Enterprises. And let's talk about why this topic is so important for you.
So that topic is extremely important to me, Allie, because I remember when I graduated from college, and I didn't think it was a big deal. This is just college, right? And it was Ohio State. And I remember my aunts, they drove all the way down from Philadelphia. And I remember getting this really big, like, hug. If you can imagine, these like middle-aged women, huge bottoms, like surrounding you
It's a
and
big
hugging
squishy
you.
hug.
A very big squishy hug. And they were so excited because I was the first person in my family on my mom's side to graduate from college. And this was big because for them it represented a change in tide. They had grown up and you know in North Carolina, later on moved during that great migration to the Philadelphia, Chester, Pennsylvania. And and you know and it was a very hard upbringing. I remember my aunt was telling me the story of like a little boy that had gotten shot right outside of her townhome there. And this was a thing that was happening constantly in their area. And it really met a shift. It met a change. And I remember when I was moving to Chicago for my first job with Anderson, and I remember asking my future colleagues, I was like, where should I live? Where should I live in this great city of Chicago? I was so excited, didn't know anything about Chicago. And my coworkers absolutely met well, and they were like, you can live in Lincoln Park, you can live in Lakeview, but whatever you do, don't live on the south side of Chicago. And I remember I followed their advice. I got this beautiful apartment right on Lakeshore Drive, right at Diversity of Sheridan Point, and a street called Sheridan. And it was so high up that you couldn't tell where the lake ended and the sky began. It was just blue when you looked out
Mm.
of this apartment window. It was so beautiful. And literally, everybody looked like Barbie and Ken. They drove a Jetta. It was a very stereotypical type of neighborhood. And I remember one day I was feeling a little bored, and I said, you know what? I am going to go ahead and take this bus. Wherever this bus lands, I'm going to take another bus, and I'm going to end up wherever the good Lord takes me. And I remember taking this bus, and it was like the bus that goes down Michigan Avenue, all the shopping district. And when that bus ended and they told us to get off, I just caught the next bus going down Michigan Avenue. And one of the things that I noticed was that the world changed. The world changed once you left Roosevelt and Michigan Avenue. It became from this beautiful shopping district to you started seeing people pushing shopping carts down the street. You started seeing boarded up windows. You started seeing, um, you know, people walking around during the day that probably should have been employed. And I started wondering to myself, I was like, there's obviously something happening, right? There's something happening once you cross this divide. There's less jobs because people have nowhere to go during the day. There's less money on this side of town. There's obviously more poverty here. And how can you have one street cause that much separation? And it occurred to me, how do we change this? We change this by creating profitable businesses. We create prosperity because when I'm successful in my neighborhood, that means that one, I'm going to hire people in my neighborhood. that is going to get job experiences, just the way that I got
Mm,
experiences working for my dad. People are going to start to have vision, right? If my neighbor can be a doctor, maybe I can be a doctor too when I grow up, right? And how do we do this? Is we do this by creating profitable businesses. We start to create successful entrepreneurship. And that is the reason why I wrote that book, was because as a first generational entrepreneur, a lot of times we're not exposed to the how to's, right? We're not lucky to have a dad that's a CPA that kind of can tell you, what to do growing up. And so this book,
mhm,
really what makes it different is, a lot of times when you see news or you see stories, they talk about statistics. They talk about, the low percentage of successful minority owned businesses. They talk about, the number of businesses, but the ones that don't reach seven figures. And I said, well, why don't we create a book that doesn't focus on statistics. We don't even really mention statistics, but instead we focus on the success stories. We focus on the outliers. And what that
mm,
means is we're going to focus on people that have created successful businesses that are above seven figures, that have profitable businesses. And we're going to ask them what was their biggest challenge and how did they overcome it? And that's the reason why I wrote that book, because I wanted to create that guide of what did we do differently to create that success in a world where everyone tells us that we can't.
mm. And why is the profit first philosophy, why is that so core to what you believe and teach and continue to share with your clients in your CFO work? And some people may not be familiar with the brand, so let's expand on that a little bit.
So, profit first is a concept that was designed by author Mike Michalowicz. And, that was probably one of the biggest turning points in my business. And I am a CPA, and I'm telling you this, that it was one of the biggest turning points in my business because, like many entrepreneurs, I started my business because I absolutely loved what I did. I had been doing accounting and taxes since I was 14 years old, and I felt like that was my gift to the world. And I loved it so much that I would have absolutely done it for free. Allie, you know me, we have conversations and I'm just spouting out tax advice constantly all the time.
Everyone
And
wants to sit at your table at the trust meetings.
And interesting, when I first started my business, that's what I actually did unintentionally. I did this work for free, right? If you couldn't afford it, that's okay. I can do a friends and family discount, right? Maybe I don't want to hear a no, so I'm going to drop my price lower so I can get the client. And that's what a lot of entrepreneurs do when they're starting out. They want to get the business, they want to grow the revenue, right? And there's no intentional thought about the bottom line. In fact, I'll tell you this, in the tax accounting world, people would come to me often. And it was interesting because on the day that they picked up their tax return, you could see that they were nervous, like actually afraid, visibly were having anxiety. And they were having anxiety because, they would be asking me questions like, how much do I owe? And I'm like, you don't know how much you owed? And they would be like, no, they don't even know their bottom line. They don't even know what their income was
Mm,
or if they even got an income in a lot of cases.
mhm,
And what I realized from reading Profit First is that you have to create intentional profitability, right? Otherwise the results that you get are very random. And so what Profit First does, it's a cash management system. It's a framework where literally as a business owner, we pay our profit first. And we do this through bank accounts, kind of like Dave Ramsey's envelope system, except for we use bank accounts. And what happens is all your collections, right, go into one bank account, and then twice a month it's allocated to different bank accounts. So it goes to a profit account, right, because we create intentional profitability based upon a set percentage. It goes to
mm,
owner's pay because reality is the day that you step out of your business is a completely different business, right? You are the most valued player. Everybody else says, I don't know what I would do if Joan left my company. But reality is you left your company. That's a bigger impact. And so we need to make sure that you as an owner are being compensated as such. Um, Taxes, right? We're going to reserve for taxes as a percentage of revenue. And the reason why is we don't want to be worried about how we're going to pay last year's taxes with this year's money. So we're going to put that money away. And then whatever's left, that's going to go to operating expenses. That's the money that we make decisions on. Do I get that fancy office building downtown? Do I get these subscriptions? Do I hire these people, right? Do I get these computer upgrades? Those are decisions that we make with what's left. And so really what's happening is we're creating an intentional framework that creates an intentional profitability. And
Mm,
Allie, this business, this method has changed many lives. It changed my business too with that.
yeah. Yeah. So many women, we fall into that trap that I've experienced and I've seen even in clients at higher levels, that we end up kind of just taking the scraps that are at the end of the month for ourselves, and not being deliberate about having a profitable business and paying ourselves. Like, so I just love the whole flip in that philosophy. And so, that's Suzanne's book. If you want to pick it up, it's Profit First from Minority Business Enterprises. And let's talk about the part of you that's drawn to, you know, there's some other things on the horizon. I know that you've shared with me privately, that are really dear to your heart as you're moving into this next chapter. I know you have your work right now as a fractional CFO, and you work with high level clients doing that work. But you've had, I asked you before this interview, I'm like, oh, can we talk about that thing, the juicy thing? And you said, yeah, I think so. So let's talk about, what you are thinking with that project. I won't even say it. I'll let you just say it. And why it's important to you and where this is going for your legacy work.
So I think we all have a specific calling in our life, and maybe some of us have multiple callings. And I think one of my innate desires is to leave the world a better place. Almost like that medical oath of do no harm. And 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 I think that we do that is how we do that is through our stories, right? How and because reality is, Allie, we learn from each other. I learn from your story. I learn from your adventures and your journey. And I think many of us learn that way. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about is creating generational wealth, and particularly Gen 1 wealth, meaning that, you know, I think a lot of us, we grow up with legacies that we're not necessarily proud of, right? They are things that we probably would not have chosen for ourselves, whether it be the family that you grew up in, the neighborhood that you grew up in, the opportunities that you were initially given. And a lot of us, are really we're at a pivot in this point in history of where we have to choose where we're going to go with our lives. Are we going to continue the same legacy that we've been given, or are we going to create a new torch that we're going to pass on to our children? And part of my work is, now that I'm complete with the book Profit First for Minority Business Enterprises, which by the way is a great book. We talk about government contracting and all those secrets that are in there. But my next project is a documentary. And what this documentary is we're literally interviewing women of color that have reached the millionaire mark, in terms of personal equity. And we're having them tell their stories, meaning that, how did I grow up? What were some of the pivotal moments where I had to make some decisions? And what were those key choices that I made that really pivoted my life? And the whole purpose is really to share those stories with others that may not have come to that point yet, because reality is that next generation is, you guys have an opportunity to go farther than we've ever gone. But by
Mm,
telling you our stories, you don't have to learn the things that we had to learn.
yeah. Yeah. So when do you see we'll start seeing some of that?
So those interviews are happening now. In terms of where it goes, I ideally would love for it to be shown on Netflix or something to that effect. But we're conducting the interviews now, so I'm excited about dropping those stories.
So she's still being elusive. Okay. It's in progress, but it's just juicy. And I remember, one of the first days we really sat down together, when I heard you talk about that project, I just got chills. I just think that's going to be so extraordinary, and will get a lot of attention. And so, if anyone's listening, you want to contribute or help Suzanne with her project, please write her. Why don't you give your website before we go on as well, like where people can reach you?
So my website is, you can find me at SuzanneMariga.com. So Suzanne spelled with an S, Susanne, Mariga, Mariga.com.
Okay. Let's get nitty gritty then, because I know people want to know this is probably at every cocktail party you go to. Do people ask you tax questions and want to know more of like the secret things we could be doing to save more money on taxes? When women get into the 7 and 8 figure ranges, right? Is it a different game with taxes? What do they need to be thinking about differently? If they're under that too, if they're under that range, how can they start thinking the same way as the millionaire businesswomen?
So, especially when you're on the profit first method, when you're creating that intentional profitability, depending on the ranges that they're in, they could have 50% of their revenue literally as adjusted gross income. That's not unusual if you're dealing with profit first. And so, if you've got $1 million company, you might be at a $500,000 in earnings. If you've got a $10 million company, you might have almost 40% of that as earnings. And so you can imagine what it's like being in the 37% tax bracket. And I think one of the biggest things that I see that businesses don't do is that, every level requires a different level of expertise, and although we want to be loyal to where we started with our initial accountant, sometimes that accountant isn't necessarily the person that's going to take you to that next level. For example, once you're what we call sorry, once we call high net worth taxation, one of the things that I like to think about is, I think one of the mistakes that people make is, they're focused on the tax deduction. So you see these people, it's Black Friday, this mad dash to go out and spend money. Their accountant's telling them to go out and buy this heavy vehicle, and they're like doctor's offices. And I'm like, why do I need this heavy vehicle for a $25,000 write off when I don't even have to drive any place, right? It's not like I need fleet. It's not like I have a lawn service. Why do I need this? And they're trying to get a tax deduction. But the reality, what's happening is, yes, they're cutting their taxes, right? But they're also cutting their own ankles. And so what I like to see and what a lot of 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs are thinking about is, how do I build net worth through tax strategy? Meaning, like, how do I get that tax deduction, but at the same time, I'm increasing my personal net worth, is what they're thinking.
Mm,
A lot of our clients at this point, they've got teeth. It's no longer a party of one. And that team is valuable. And the longer the team is with them, the better the team gets with their job. And so one of the things that they might explore is, okay, how do I incentivize my person to stay a little bit longer, right? Because they're obviously more efficient, while at the same time getting me a tax write off. And one of the ways might be, for example, I'm going to create a 401k plan. But it's not going to be just a simple straight out of the box safe harbor plan. No. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reward my team for longevity, meaning that you might have to be with me for 6 years to fully vest in this plan. Now, for example, if you would go ahead and you would leave, let's say after 2 years, shining lights of a competitor, and you haven't fully vested in the plan, what that means is I've gotten a tax deduction every single year that you've been here, but you don't get to take that money with you. That money stays in a
mhm.
trust. And that means that the money can be allocated to future contributions, or if I'm the last one standing at the time that the company sold, this money is now my money, right? And so they're looking at, how do I create an incentive for my employees to get better while at the same time getting a tax deduction. Another thing
Mm.
that they're looking at is generational wealth, building generational wealth. And, I talked about, my dad hired me at 14 years old. And, you can actually hire your children. And not only can you hire
I
your
have 2
children, there you go. You've got
on
like
payroll. Yep.
$27,000 in tax deductions right there. And I've seen them check us in
Yep.
at the trust.
Yep,
And,
they do the
and it,
registration and that's something I just wanna pause and say, there's so many people don't realize that when you're entrepreneurial too, you want your kids to learn this stuff. You want them to be part of the business, and it's a tax-free payroll that you can run up to a certain limit. And it varies, of course, like, depending on their age, what makes sense, right? What they should be doing, and you have to keep records, but it when I learned that, it was, a game changer, and it's good for them too. What I'm hearing with all these strategies you're sharing is there's strategies that don't just save taxes, there's strategies that work in the interest of us and the business. That's the different thinking. I like it.
exactly. And if you're in that 37% bracket, which, a lot of seven, eight figure companies are, especially when they're applying profit first, right? You're talking about saving 37 cents for a dollar. And if I hire my child, they're making less than a standard deduction, then I've suddenly have just transferred that income from my 37% bracket to a 0% bracket is what I've just
Mhm.
done. And it's interesting because, um, with that being said, with that 37% bracket is that, now my child, has earned this money and, they can purchase their own sports, right? My daughter does competitive dance. Every time she dances, there's new costumes, there's new wardrobe. It can be quite expensive. And now
Mhm.
because she's got earned income, she can buy her own costumes is what she can do.
Mhm.
Now, for example, let's say that she wants to go to college, right? So let's say I have her put her money in a Roth IRA. By the way, Roth IRA is an after tax deduction, right? And so 0% tax, even though it's 0% tax, is still an after tax deduction. And what that means for her is that now she can use that money to pay for college. I just started building her college fund. If she ends up getting a full ride scholarship, because she gets it from her mama, right? What that means is that she can go ahead and she can use that money to buy her own home. And if she doesn't need to buy her own home, she's got her start of her retirement. So again, I've created generational wealth in addition to having given her really great experience. So
Yeah.
that's something else that we're looking at from that standpoint.
Yeah. It's a different flip of thinking this way, and this is one of the things I love about, well, I know taxes actually get me excited. I don't know why, but it's kind of fun, right? It's a bit of a game. It's like, here are the rules and what is true, and then what do we want to do here? And it's so fascinating, the discussions I hear, the women at the higher levels, the different things I'm telling you all listening and watching, that the way that these women think and how they approach money and taxes and investing, everything is so much different than you will hear from your neighborhood moms typically, and other business owners even that you work with. And any other tips for the women listening, and things they have to start thinking about doing differently if they want to reach those higher levels?
So, it's interesting because there's a lot of things really with it. And I love being in the room with the trust because, we have so many great conversations about it. And from a financial standpoint, we talked about creating intentional profitability, we talked about tax strategy. I think it's also important, and I've heard you, Ali, talk about it several times, even on your podcast, the Pareto principle, that 80-20 rule, right? And what Pareto principle says is that 20% of your clients bring in 80% of your bottom line, right? They bring in 80% of your net income. And so it really is, creating those systems that help you identify where your Pareto success really is, because
Mhm.
reality is, a lot of times, we can spend all of our effort, all of our energy on this 80% of our energy on this 20% of our bottom line, right? And so in many ways, we're turning our wheel. But if we have a way of really monitoring and creating those financial systems that really identify, where our success is really heading towards, right? Those
Mhm.
areas that are really adding value to our clients, that they're really willing to pay whatever just to have these results, right? And we can hone in on that and have the accounting systems that tell us what that is, but not only what it is, it changes, right? It doesn't stay the same. We live in a world that's constantly changing. And when that changes, being able to even detect that, right? Having that robust system that allows you to do that, that's going to be instrumental in bringing yourself to that 7, 8 figure mark and really growing and beyond. And even as you're in that 7, 8 figure mark, it helps you really hone in and really be able to create the outcomes that you want.
Mm. So the last question I always ask on this show, is, what is the reward in all this for you, Susanne? I mean, look at the point you're at. You're already a successful author. You've sold one of your businesses. But you yet have all these things that you're still excited to do. You can feel the excitement in your voice and everything you're creating and where you're still going. And so, what is the reward?
Oh man, Ali, there's so many rewards. I mean, like, I just think of just the things that, my I've been able to do that my kids have been able to do. I mean, these were things that I didn't even imagine growing up that I would be able to do that. The places I've been able to travel, taking my family overseas and being able to like, even go to Paris and just go experience things I never experienced. But I think the thing that really lights me up and excites me is the fact that we're going to be changing the lives of the next generation, that we're creating a
Mm,
new vision. That I mean, I think right now we're in a pivotal time where, you know, everybody has an opportunity to create and co-create a life that's different than anything that we've ever imagined in history. It doesn't matter who you are or what you're at. Even if you find a roadblock, you can find another way.
mm. I love that. Any last words of advice for everyone?
In terms of advice, I would go back to, I love Simon Sinek and I love his advice about start with why. And this is really important because, I think that as women and as entrepreneurs, you know, we go through, the world is constantly changing, and we have to accept that it's okay to change. And and I think when you know your North Star, when you know what lights you up at the end of the day, when you know what winning really looks like for you personally, it really it really is a starting place for creating the outcomes that you're looking for.
Mm, thank you. I just realized that was my second last question, but I had a feeling there's something else. So, Susanne, thank you for joining us today. Again, to learn more about Susanne, go to SusanneMariga.com. And is there anything else that you'd like to offer or share with everyone? As far as I think there was something on your site that they could go access or get.
Yeah. So for anybody that's interested in starting their profit first journey, I have a study, and it was done by Profit First Professionals as a corporation, of what healthy companies look like. And when I say this, it means what percentage is going towards profit of their revenue, what percentage is going to owners' pay, what percentage is even being put aside for taxes, what percentage is operating expenses. And it changes from the level of company that you're at. So if you're under 250,000 in revenue, your percentage is going to be very different than if you're a $10 million company. But what it does allow you to do is to look for where you're at and see where you're at and benchmark it against others in your industry, and then just start from there. If you're at 1% profitability, just increase it to 2%. If you're at 2, go up to 3, and just make slow, gradual changes from there to get to those target allocation percentages.
Mm, awesome. Susanne, thank you for joining us today. And I can't wait to see you actually later this week. You're flying in to meet. So thank you for your time, and just thank you for all you do and just all the authenticity. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Subscribe now to the Reward Podcast to be sure to not miss an episode. And don't forget to visit jointhetrust.org to learn more about our modern community for forward-thinking 7- and 8-figure women entrepreneurs. You can learn more, apply to join us, or refer another woman you know who is over the $1 million mark and is ready for a different type of women's network. We have events coming up both live and online that are truly creating new possibilities for female leaders. That's jointhetrust.org. See you there.